Good afternoon and welcome to the latest edition of Baseball Pure Perspective. It's Saturday, the 18th of May. Welcome, everyone. And today we're sponsored by eCredit Success, life-changing credit solutions for veterans and military personnel. Vets on Media has partnered with ECS to offer a free credit consultation and discounts for all veterans and military personnel. ECS is a results-driven credit-building program, so go to www.vetsonradio.com and click on the eCredit Success logo and get your free consultation today. I'm here with my co-host now, Gerard LaBelle. Gerard, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic, Patrick. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. You know, Gerard and I were talking earlier this week, said there's always something in baseball to talk about. It never ends. And what we're going to talk about today is something that's been a more of a controversy year after year, more so this year, and that's the umpiring situation.
Umpires. Can't live with them, can't live without them. It's an amazing thing.
Isn't that what they say about women?
Yeah. Well, they're kind of like the same thing. Well, I don't want to get into that. But this past week now, Major League Baseball suspended Fielding Culbreth for allowing Houston to make an illegal pitching change. He received a 2-game suspension and a fine, and also the other 3 members of his crew were fined. And that is because he clearly ignored a rule in the very thick rule book of Major League Baseball. Now, the question is, if he deserved a fine for missing an obvious rule, why aren't other umpires fined and or suspended for missing obvious things?
I said just in the last 2 years, we can talk of numerous calls that would take up this whole show just about the blunders, and they know they're wrong, especially with the umpiring, with the HD TV and the reviews they do on the home run calls. But I think there's a lot has to do with Major League Baseball dropping the ball.
I can't help but agree with you on that one. I have said for a long time, and I know that the show is called A Pure Perspective, and we like to look at the past and the historical aspects of the game. But let's be honest, this game has evolved. This is not the same game that was played by Cy Young back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. We still recognize Cy Young's records, of course, but we are looking at a time when, as you just mentioned, you've got HDTV, you've got multiple angles of every single call. And I think that Major League Baseball owes it to the fans who spend their hard-earned money to come out to the park and buy the products that are sponsored by Major League Baseball. I believe they owe it to get the calls right when they can do so.
Oh, yeah, and we're human, but unfortunately, you got to remember how quick things happen. But, you know, the era you're talking about, even the era of Tom Seaver, Bob Gibson, and Al Kaline, is different. They didn't have the HDTV and the replay over and over and over again, and microscopic, the Coors Light freeze cam and all that other stuff that they have today.
Right, exactly. And you know, here's the thing. I'm sure that there are some folks that would say, well, you know, back in the 40s and the 50s, the umpires missed a lot of calls, but we weren't able to scrutinize them because most of the games weren't on TV or weren't being recorded. And I say, okay, I understand that, and that is the history of the game. You know, there's still a lot of people that think that the Giants were stealing signs when Bobby Thompson hit the shot heard round the world.
And that's over 60 years ago.
Yeah, you know, and so, okay, that's part of the lore of baseball now. But now that we have multiple angle shots and we have HDTV and replay and, you know, all these technologies, I think, again, baseball owes it to their fans to get the calls right whenever they can.
You know, it's funny, the baseball rules 9.0, the umpire, there's a long list of rules, And one of the second to last rules that says the most important rule for umpires is always, and they have these in capital letters, be in position to see every play. Even though your decision may be 100% right, players still question if they feel you are not in a spot to see the play clearly and definitely. And so many times we see today, umpires are just standing in the wrong place. They're on the wrong side of the bag, the wrong side of the plate, the wrong side of the player.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And, I think that the problem becomes that the umpires become a little complacent out there. I know that in his book, The Umpire Strikes Back, and I can't remember the name of the author, but he talked about the fact that, and I paid particular attention to this being a Detroit Tigers fan, that during Mickey Stanley's last year with the Tigers, he was the second base umpire, and he spent most of the game halfway out in center field trying to talk Stanley into playing one more year in the major leagues. And he even got a reprimand from the president of the American League for not being in the place he was supposed to be. But again, I think there's a lot of complacencies in the umpires that say, hey, when I make the call, it is what it is.
It's funny. We were talking on the way in today about we couldn't remember that colorful umpire. Mm-hmm. He's the author of that book that you just mentioned, Umpire Strikes Back, Ron Luciano.
Ron Luciano, there it is.
How ironic.
Yes. Yes, yeah. And, he was a very colorful umpire. And really, I don't think that he was considered by the players to be a bad umpire.
Oh, no, he was one of the better ones.
Yeah. But the point is that you get situations that come up that I just believe that umpires almost are arrogant about, hey, I've made the call and that's the way it is.
And they're trying to make it about them, which it's not about them.
Exactly.
And that play we were talking about earlier with Houston, it was a pitching change that got overlooked. What was it that happened? All
right, here's the situation was that Houston had brought in a relief pitcher, left-hander, to pitch to the left-handed batter. When that relief pitcher came in, the other team, and it was the Padres, I believe, made a change from a left-handed batter to a right-handed batter. Well, the Houston manager went out and made the change to a right-handed pitcher. When the opposing manager came out and protested and said, wait a minute, the rules state when you bring in a relief pitcher, he's got to pitch to at least one batter.
Correct.
That Fielding Culbreth was the crew chief, and he allowed them to make that pitching change without that left-handed pitcher throwing to at least one batter.
And I'm glad they got fined. At least somebody did something. But some of these other calls, like, what was it, last week, that home run call?
The home run call of Oakland. Oh, and my heavens.
I heard all four announcers, I don't know about you, all four announcers, radio, TV, from both teams, said, yeah, this is going to be overturned. This is a no-brainer. And they were all shocked when the umpire came out and put the guy back to second base.
Well, and that's, we're talking about Angel Hernandez, who is well known to be an umpire who is against instant replay and against the ability to overturn calls. And I have to say that knowing that about him, that I believe it was arrogance on his part that, hey, I've made the call. I don't care what the TV shows. I made the call, and that's what it is.
And that's what happened.
And, of course, he said that they didn't have the benefit of all the angles and the TV that they were watching in the clubhouse. And if that is true, which Joe Torre disputed and said, no, that's not right. And Joe Torre, of course, is in Major League Baseball. He is a member of the Major League Baseball commissioner staff there. And, he said, no, the umpires get all the same feeds that the TV has. So, somebody's not telling the right story here.
Well, the bottom line is, I think Joe Torre and Bud Selig, they need to step it up and override these decisions because, they actually said, yeah, they got it wrong, but it's up to the crew to change it. And I disagree with that.
Yeah, there's something wrong with that. And again, that is where I say that they owe it to the fans. And, you know, in some regard, they owe it to the players. And, you know, again, one of the more egregious ones in recent years was Jim Joyce.
Oh.
Missing the out at first base, the last out of the game, which would have been Armando Galarraga's perfect game for the Detroit Tigers.
He knew it. He apologized. But again, it's left in the history books as a one-hit shutout.
It was a one-hit shutout. That is correct. And
it wasn't even close.
the replay showed he was out by a step and a half.
I think even more than that. I mean, it was just clearly, they announced, say it's over, perfect game. And wait. And they kept saying no. And everybody's just staring at the umpire.
Yeah, and you know, the question, and of course now Bud Selig says, well, you can't go back and change every single call, but when it's an egregious bad call like that.
And it's not going to affect the standings.
That's right. Well, why? Why? I mean, I don't even know if Galarraga is still in baseball, but he could be able to say, I pitched a perfect game in Major League Baseball. And he now can't because it's not in the record books that way.
I remember him saying, I'm going to show my son, maybe it's not in the record books, I'll show him the film, and we still had the celebration. But as far as the record goes, maybe one day they took that asterisk away from Roger Maris, but who knows?
Right. And, you know, again, sometimes you have to go back and make the right call and do the right thing. And, you know, as when we had talked about this being the theme for this week, I went and I did a little research on some various bad calls, excuse me, that affected some games that really were important games, standings games, playoff games, etc. And you've got some really bad situations out there that sometimes need to be fixed, and it's an unfortunate situation. But as we talked about earlier today about the George Brett pine tar incident.
Yeah, McClellan.
Tim McClellan was the presiding umpire. He called George Brett out after hitting a home run because Billy Martin pointed out that the pine tar was too high on the bat. Major League Baseball rules, it's an obscure rule, but it says pine tar can only be 18 inches up the handle. And when they measured George's bat that day, it was 24 inches up the handle, and McClellan called him out. And we've all seen the famous replay of Brett coming out of the dugout wanting to climb into the same shirt with McClellan. Mm-hmm. But, you know, in that particular case, Major League Baseball did the right thing. Lee McPhail, the president of the American League, overturned McClellan's call. Yeah,
he's been involved in a lot of controversy. And that, by the way, it was his rookie year. And he's one of these guys that take forever to make the call strike. People are walking away, and then after he takes a few steps away from the play, think walking to first, then he'll call a strike. He's notorious for that. Mm-hmm. And he was I saw a call last week. He was standing on the wrong side of third base, and made a bad call. It's like 3 games in a row in the same series that happened to him.
Well, it seems like McClellan is one of these umpires that, and of course I don't know the man. And I've not heard this about him, but with the number of controversial calls he's been involved with, it seems like he's one of these types of umpires that says, when I make the call, that's what it is. And if you bounce the ball up to home plate and I call it a strike, that's what it is, a strike. And there's no amount of argument or replay that's going to change his mind. You know, you just mentioned that he's been involved in a number of controversial plays. And the 2007 National League wild card tiebreaker, Matt Holliday, was called safe at home on a tag-up play.
Oh, that was Colorado.
That's
Colorado
right,
was an incredible 19 out of 20 game run.
Right. And, you know, a lot of people still say Holliday did not touch the plate. And his explanation afterwards was that he saw the catcher stick his leg out and touch Holliday, but he wanted to see if the catcher was going to drop the ball.
And he's been here, 30 years as umpire, and it's just amazing that he just still gets away with it. He was behind the plate on that Sammy Sosa's cork
bat incident. That is another one. Yep, you bet. And also, he was behind the plate, or he was the umpire that made the call in the ALCS 2009, Yankees versus Angels. He had 2 calls that day that were controversial. One was the Nick Swisher out that he called for leaving the base early. And replays seemed to indicate that wasn't necessarily a good call.
Mm-hmm.
But he also called Cano safe when he had clearly been tagged out by Mike Napoli.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy? And yeah, I mean he's been a lot involved. Lots of championship games, scores of them, World Series and Championship Series. Currently the tallest umpire in baseball.
Right. Right.
At 6'6". He also was involved in a few perfect games and no hitters.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and here's what makes me wonder, if he is continually involved in these controversial games, how does he get to be a playoff umpire?
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. It's a lot of political stuff behind the scenes we're not aware of, but somebody needs to step up the plate and hold these people more accountable because there's just too much wrong. I saw a play the other night, Mets St. Louis game. Can't remember the umpire, but Rick Ankiel, who's acquired by the Mets this week in St. Louis, hits a double. He actually tried to. He thought it was a single. He tried to stretch it, and they called him out. And the umpire said, "Wait a minute, you're awarded second base because it's a ground rule double." The ball bounced off the side of the wall, the short wall behind third base. Fan didn't touch it, didn't even go into the stands. And he called the ground rule double. And Mike Matheny of the Cardinals came out and argued profusely, but again, they're not going to overturn the call, and it was a gift double.
Wow.
I mean, every day we're watching baseball, something like this seems to happen.
Well, and, I don't want to take the human element out of the game.
And they just try. That seems that's what you're trying to do with all the instant replay. And sooner or later, there's going to be electronic strike zone.
Well, and that's that's what I was just going to mention. They do have the strike tracker, and every once in a while, you'll see that somebody got rung up on a ball that was outside the strike zone. Okay, that's human, and I don't want to take the human nature out of the game, and that's where the purist will step in and say, then a bad call is a bad call and let it go. But again, these men are making millions of dollars. People are putting a second mortgage on the house so they can take their family to the ball game and buy a couple of hot dogs and maybe a beer or a Coke. It's outrageous, the prices that are being charged. And I again say, baseball owes it to the fans and the teams, to get it right.
And here's the thing: people say, "Yeah, this is their living. It's entertainment. It's baseball, the greatest pastime of all time." Some people like to say, "Well, now it's the NFL now," but they're having their issues now too.
Sure.
And some of on a sidetrack, some people think of the NFL maybe not even existed 20 years as we know because how lightening up they are and everything with the concussions, and it's not getting to be a tough game anymore.
Right.
I mean, I know some hockey players that played in the day of in the 60s where before they wore helmets, they don't even want to watch it today because it's just a different game.
Yeah.
But the umpire situation is not getting any better, and I think one of the easiest calls in baseball today is the first base call because it's a sight and sound, and that seems to be the one that's getting wrong the most.
Well, let's talk about the 1985 World Series and St. Louis Cardinals versus the Kansas City Royals.
Right.
The Cardinals could have won that series in 6 games. Don Denkinger called George Orta safe on a slow roller that Jack Clark tossed to Todd Worrell, covering first base. And the replays clearly show that Todd Worrell beat George Orta to the base. But Denkinger called him safe. The Royals go on to score 2 runs, take Game 6, and then win Game 7 to take the World Series. But had the correct call been made, the Cardinals may have won that game and won the series in 6 games.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little inches here, there, and lots of games that could have gone very differently. You know, like that. It's not an umpire call, but can't talk about a game in inches. When Bill Buckner missed that ball, they kind of blamed it on his bad feet. They didn't. You know, that was only Game 6. They hadn't lost the World Series.
Right.
There was another game after that,
Yep.
and they beat this guy up on one game. You know, so yeah, it's a human element, like you said. It's a game of inches. They are human, but it's not all bad. I mean, we talked earlier about sometimes it's only a game. I mean, yeah, people make their living, some of it's their livelihood, but it's just a game. There's more important things in life. And we talked about an incident earlier before the show started, that when people come together on what's really important in life. We talked about the umpire that passed away in 1996.
Oh, right.
What's his name?
Yeah, we talked about
Yeah, I got it right here. I'm gonna pull it. Yeah, it was the beginning of opening day in Cincinnati, and at that time it was still Cincinnati throwing the first pitch, which has changed today because of the TV.
Right.
They don't. Other teams beat them to the punch, but it was a John McSherry.
That's right.
And that was a day where they come together. It wasn't about umpiring. It wasn't about the ball players. And I gotta read a little something here about that day. He basically, for people that don't know, he dropped dead. He was 52 years old. You could see him collapse behind home plate. It was opening day, 1996 in Cincinnati, and he died within the hour of a heart attack. And he was in poor health. And it was going back and forth whether they should continue the game. And usually it's in the umpire's hands. Now, and there was an article Tim Sullivan wrote from the Cincinnati Enquirer, said the doctors could do nothing for John McSherry, and his fellow umpires were stumped on what to do. They didn't know whether to proceed with opening day or to postpone it. They were not sure whether to go on with the game or to grieve. Their sense of duty and their sense of loss were both profound and profoundly conflicted. In the hour of need, they needed a nudge. 7 pitches into Cincinnati's 1996 baseball season, McSherry collapsed as he walked kind of wobbly, and I remember watching that game from the playing field at Riverfront Stadium. Within an hour, he was pronounced dead. Now, the third base umpire, Tom Hallion, followed his friend to University Hospital, leaving Jerry Crawford and Steve Ripley. So it was just the 2 umpires that remained to sort out things at the stadium. So the first plan was to play ball and sort out whatever they needed to do. So the umpires are brought up to believe that they are not as big as the game. That was their thinking at the time. They're not as big as the game. They officiate, and that they should always subordinate their own interests to the greater good. They would have had to be convinced that there was no reason to resume. So they didn't decide by themselves. So on the afternoon, when the umpires were incapable of dispassionate opinions, it fell to the players and managers to provide their perspective. And I quote, and Ray Knight was the manager of the Cincinnati Reds at that time, and he went up to Crawford, who was the son of Shag Crawford, who was an umpire, Harry Crawford. He said, I want you to know right now, you don't have to worry about not playing this game. He said, you'll have my support 100%. And Crawford told Knight that he planned to go with 2 umpires and to play the game when the starting pitchers were prepared. So Knight returned to the clubhouse to find his team in no condition to continue. Now, this is the players, not the umpires.
Right.
This is the players' feeling for an umpire. Barry Larkin, who's a Hall of Famer, went very quietly and with much emotion to his manager, Ray Knight, said, I've had a lot of deaths in my family, and in good conscience and in respect for life, I can't go out there. And Larkin and our outfielder at the time, Eric Davis, went to the umpire's room behind home plate, where it usually is, to offer their condolences and express their concerns. So, and a few minutes later, Crawford called the game off, citing the emotions of all involved. It's probably a little traumatic, he said. Said Eric Davis, the players and the umpires are at each other's throats all the time, but unity is more important now than balls and strikes. This is a situation we're in together. And so everything being put in perspective, which was more important. So on this one day in baseball history, the people in uniform generally understood that the right thing to do was to defer to the umpire's decision. If they were determined to play out of a sense of obligation or of means of coping, Pete Shirk, he said, who was the pitcher that day, the starting pitcher, was going to be prepared to pitch. He said it would have been extremely hard, but I was kind of torn between what was the right and what was wrong. If the umpires wanted to go out in his honor, I was ready to go out and back him up. But I thought they made the right decision. Shirk threw the first pitch of the season at 2:09 and was stunned that McSherry did not call it a strike. So I never knew that. He said he was right down the middle and he called it a ball. It was like he didn't react to it. That's what Pete Shirk said. But he seemed fine after that. Then Montreal's Mark Grudzielanek subsequently flied out to right field. Mike Lansing struck out swinging. The count on Rondell White stood at 1-1 when McSherry stepped away from the plate and signaled that something was wrong. So he just said, hold on, time out for a second. Reds catcher Eddie Tabanisi recalled, I turned around and said, are you all right, John? He didn't say anything. I thought maybe he pulled something by the way he was walking. So in the Reds dugout, pitching coach Don Gullett guessed McSherry had hurt his back, but then the huge umpire's legs buckled beneath him, and everyone in the ballpark knew that it was much worse than that. Once he rolled John over, John never was conscious, Crawford said. I don't think he ever heard me when I got to him or when I was talking to him. So when a tragedy unfolds in full view of thousands of spectators, it has a bound to affect everyone in attendance, the players, the umpires, and the umpires might have felt that John McSherry's loss more deeply, but no one shared a compassion could have cared to continue, and that included the players on both sides, the fans. And Pete Shirk said, he said, I watched a man die today, and it hits home in a hurry.
Sure.
So this is a time when they realize we're both human. Mm-hmm. We're going to do this for the greater good. It has nothing to do with what goes on in the field. This is about human life. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we forget that, and everybody still crucifies the umpire. They made funny poems about it, and people have their opinions. But that's one day I'll never forget, and we talked about Lou DeMuro, who's famous for the shoe polish incident. Now, that was an incident that was barely overturned, and it was the World Series in 1969. Cleon Jones supposedly struck out. He got hit by a pitch. No, go back, you're done. So Gil Hodges brings out a ball, and the controversy that says, was it another ball he had in his pocket, or was it really the shoe polish? Then, when everybody had black shoes, shine their shoes with shoe polish every day for incidents like that. But he showed the umpire the ball, Lou DeMuro, and he awarded Cleon Jones first base. Right after that, Don Clendenin hits a 2-home run. Mets win 3-2, win the game. Yep. Could that have been a turning point in the World Series?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And, Jerry Koosman, giving an interview a few years later, said that he rubbed the ball on his shoe and gave it to Hodges. But, of course,
I never heard that.
One thing that was well known about Jerry Koosman is that he was a practical joker.
Right.
And when he gave that interview, he might have very well given it with tongue in cheek.
Oh, yeah.
But
I used to see him on Kiner's Corner. Ralph Kiner had that show, Kiner's Corner, after the Mets games years ago. And when he was on the show, he would start saying things to Kiner, and Kiner would get lost because he was joking around. He didn't know what the heck he was talking about. Yeah.
Well, one of the other Mets who happened to be in the dugout that day also gave an interview and said that when the ball came into the dugout, that it knocked over a ball bag and that they used for infield practice, and a bunch of balls fell out of the ball bag, and one of them had shoe polish on it, and that's the one that Gil Hodges picked up. Now, of course, a controversy like that, we'll never know the truth. But when the umpire is presented with a ball with shoe polish on it, he makes the right call. He reverses his decision and does the right thing. Now, the Orioles and their fans probably look at that and say, no, it was the wrong thing. He called the guy out, let him be out. But the truth of the matter is what I've said from the beginning. Baseball owes it to their fans to be right as much as they possibly can.
Right. Yeah, and Lou DeMuro, Earl Weaver came out and argued profusely with him, who the day before, same umpire threw him out of the game. And it was the first time in like 40-some years that a manager was thrown out of a World Series game. Because he was notorious for arguing with umpires. One of the biggest ones, besides Lou Piniella.
But Earl also was very cognizant and even was quoted saying that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he said the integrity of umpires is above question, because the same guy who threw you out the day before will treat you like it's a brand new day and nothing has happened. And that is essentially true. And you know,
So what you're saying is the umpires got to do what the players do. We have a short memory. It's a long season. Have a short memory.
exactly right, exactly right. And you know, here's the thing. You know, of course, that I was involved in coaching high school sports for 26 years.
Yeah.
And we always said that the best officials, whether it be a baseball umpire or a track official or a football referee, the best officials were the ones that when the game was over, you didn't even know that they had been there. Mm-hmm. They didn't insert themselves into the game, and they didn't make the game about them. You know, and when I think about some of the bad calls, and you know, and I got to go back to the one with Angel Hernandez this week. I think that kind of a bad call is essentially about the umpire making the game about them instead of making it about the players.
And that's got to change.
It really does. And the only way it can change is if baseball makes the umpires accountable. And, you know, every sport, if you in your post-game press conference criticize the referees, the league is going to fine you. Yet, except in this case where this Fielding Culbreth makes that bad call this week, that's the first time in a long time I've heard about umpires being suspended and or fined because they made a bad call.
Yeah, they're going to be paying more attention to it. We may not think there's any hope, but I was kind of just shocked the way loosely Joe Torre kind of shrugged it off and not really clamping down like he should. So they're going to have to buckle up because they're going to keep hearing it.
Well, and that's, you know, you make a very good point there about Joe Torre kind of shrugging it off. And I know, you know, one of the things about Joe was that he was a player's manager. When he managed all those egos in New York, he was a player's manager, and the players loved playing for him because he wasn't the kind that had ticky-tack rules. And, you know, he expected that you are a professional, you will act like a professional. But to see, as you just said, the way he kind of shrugged it off as, oh, well, you know, these are humans, and it's the human aspect of the game, you know, if a pitcher goes headhunting because the guy that hit before hit a home run off of him, they're going to find that pitcher. They're not going to say that's the human aspect of the game. Now, back in the day, yeah, it was. But nowadays, when we're talking about people's livelihood and we're talking about concussions, they're going to find somebody. And what I love to see is when that ball starts getting close in and that home plate umpire says, okay, hold on. And he walks over and warns both benches, if this turns into a headhunting game, somebody's out of the ball game. And we've seen them get thrown out. And that, to me, is an umpire who's taking charge of the game, which is that's what they're there for.
You know, and sometimes the warnings get ridiculous, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes unintentional and has no business. Sometimes there's those unwritten rules. Let the players do what they have to do sometimes, and it's over with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now we all remember the controversial Commissioner Ford Frick.
Oh.
He was from 1951 to 1965.
Yes.
And he's the one that kind of put that asterisk because he was kind of pro Babe Ruth with Mickey Mantle.
Well, I think he also wanted Mickey Mantle to win that.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah. I don't think he would have put that asterisk if Mickey Mantle would have.
No, I believe that too. If Mick had broken Ruth's record, he would have been most happy.
Just before he was elected commissioner or appointed commissioner in 1949, he actually wrote the 10 Commandments of umpiring that stands today. And I'm gonna recite them.
Okay.
And this is by Ford Frick, and it's in the books today. Number 1 was keep your eye on the ball. Number 2, keep all your personalities out of your work. Forget and forgive. 3, avoid sarcasm. Don't insist on the last word. Number 4, never charge a player, and above all, no pointing your finger or yelling. That's why a lot of times you see umpires with their arms folded.
Mm-hmm.
Now, number 5, hear only the things you should hear. Be deaf to others. 6, keep your temper. A decision made in anger is never sound. 7, watch your language. 8, take pride in your work at all times. Remember, respect for an umpire is created off the field as well as on the field. 9, review your work. You will find, if you are honest, that 90% of the trouble is traceable to loafing, not paying attention.
Or being in the wrong spot.
Yeah. And, of course, 1949, we still didn't have instant replay yet, as we know it today. They had film that they could review, but not as clear as they do today. And the last one, he says, no matter what your opinion of another umpire, never make an adverse comment regarding him. To do so is despicable and ungentlemanly. And those were the 10 commandments of umpiring written by Ford Frick in 1949, 64 years ago.
Wow. And see, I didn't think Frick was that good of a commissioner, but I'll have to change my opinion because that's exactly right on. Those 10 commandments of umpiring, right on. And unfortunately, it looks like some umpires haven't read them.
Yeah, and it's just like anything else. When players go into slumps, umpires probably have to do too. But I tell you, if we miss something in our own work, if we don't get the sales or keep our numbers up, we don't get paid.
Yep.
They get paid no matter what.
Right.
And it's if they're going to get better and stay around for a long time, they got to get back to fundamentals just like the players do.
Right.
The players, they got to go back. Do they take batting practice every day? Do they go in some room and review what they're going to do and go over their integrity and have a meeting? I don't know. I never heard about that. Do the umpires have their meetings, their batting practice, their strategies before the game as far as, hey, are we going to be in the right place? Are we going to stay on our toes? Are we going to do the right thing? Are we going to second guess? Are we going to confer each other on if someone asks? One thing I think has gone too far. How many times almost on every pitch, catcher gets up, points to first base, points to third base, to see if the guy went around. Now everything on a check swing is almost automatic strike. That's ridiculous.
Automatic check with the base umpire. That's right.
I never used to see that when I was a kid. It was ridiculous.
And 99% of the time, if the catcher wanted a second opinion, he didn't point. He just said, would you check the first base umpire, without even turning his head to the home plate umpire? Because that was an unwritten rule. You don't show that home plate umpire up because you're going to have to come to bat. And umpires have been known to say the pitches don't have to be so good to be a strike when you come up.
Yeah, and it's not all bad. I know it's an automatic ejection for arguing strike three.
Right.
Or balls and strikes in general. And I've seen lately a few umpires be pretty patient with people. I mean, lately on some of these questionable calls.
Yeah.
They stand there arguing, and they understand it's a long season. These guys are nocturnal, traveling at night and playing by day and night, and it's it gets crazy out there, but that's the way it is. It is the final call, and you just don't see. You never see a strike overturned. That doesn't happen.
Right. Well, and let's face it, as we talked about earlier off the air, being an umpire in the major leagues is really kind of a thankless job. When the umpires' names are announced, every time I have been to the ballpark, there's always been a smattering of boos. And it doesn't matter whether it's the first game of a series, and this is a brand new crew that has come in for this particular series. They announce the umpires, and suddenly they get booed. The umpires have no home place. You're from New York, I'm from Detroit, we both live in Arizona. Every once in a while, all of those teams are at home, and they get to spend time with their family. Umpires, they're always on the road. They never have a home game.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? I always wondered about this. I love baseball so much. When I was a kid, played every chance, get to every ball game. Wanted to be a major leaguer so bad. I always thought, who would want to be an umpire?
Mm-hmm.
I always thought about, did they like the game, and then they figured they couldn't play, but so they'd want to do that aspect. But I just can't imagine what's inside of a person to want to pursue that type of a career. I mean, I guess it's the same with any profession. We're all made up of with different interests and passions, but that's a tough one. And as far as a historical point, do you know there were 40 Major League Baseball players who eventually became umpires?
No, really.
And there's never been any umpires who became players, but there's been actually 40 players. And I look at the list, and there's nobody you would know. And most of them were before the modern baseball era. Mm-hmm. Well, not really, some of them, but early 1900s. George Hildebrand was an umpire, and he became a ball player. These are all ball players who became umpire. Hank O'Day, Ralph Pinelli, George Pipgrass, William Spike Shannon, Vincent Smith. The last one was Lonnie Warneke. He was a player from in 1930, and he was an umpire from 1949 to 1955, and that was the last player to become an umpire.
Wow. Well, I wonder if they had it, because I know in the NFL, if a NFL player becomes a referee, that he is permanently barred from doing any games that for the team that he played for. And I wonder if they had that in Major League Baseball, where if you had played for the St. Louis Cardinals, for instance, that you could not umpire a game that the Cardinals were involved in.
Yeah, that would be pretty interesting. And you do have to be objective. And I'm wondering if these umpires had a favorite team when they were a kid.
Well,
they were a kid too. You always wonder about this, because all the ball players, they very rarely get to play for the team they grew up with, but they're loyal to whoever they're playing for at the time. And as much as they bounce around, they have to be today.
Right.
There's been some funny, interesting quotations about umpires and from umpires, and even if they weren't in the business, who do you think? This is an interesting person that made this statement. I couldn't see well enough to play when I was a boy, so they gave me a special job. They made me an umpire.
Oh, golly. That's got to be one of those character umpires.
No, it's not an umpire. He wasn't in the game.
Oh, he wasn't in the game?
Yes. He was just saying he's made.
Oh, okay.
He was kind of being joking about it. And I don't expect anybody to know this, but he said, I couldn't see enough to play, so they made me an umpire. It was President Truman who made that quote.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, it sounds like something that George Burns would have said.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's too funny.
Well, and this is a quote from Terry Pendleton one day in 1995. He wanted action against the power trip umpires. He felt there's a lot of umpires who are on a power trip. Mm-hmm. He said, I know that if I bump an umpire, I'm suspended for 4 games. If they bump a guy you never hear about it if they do it. So if we curse one of them, we get thrown out of the game and fined. If they curse a guy, they don't get thrown out. That was his goal. So apparently some of them, I could imagine, nobody can keep their cool all the time. So I imagine there'd be times umpires have lost their temper too. I've never questioned the integrity of an umpire. Their eyesight, yes. Leo DeRocha.
Yeah, that sounds like Leo DeLip.
Now here's another one. Ozzie Smith, Hall of Fame shortstop, said, I think umpires have too much power. Without any system of checks and balances, and the more money a player makes, the more the umpire tries to show off that power to him. Unfortunately, since I signed my contract, my strike zone has suddenly become a lot larger. Yeah.
Well, and that raises the question. If an umpire is the home plate umpire and he's got the standard strike zone in the first inning, but he comes into an extra inning game and it starts getting to the 16th, the 17th, the 18th inning, does he expand his strike zone because he wants to go and have his meal after the game?
Well, here's the thing. I've heard many announcers say on a blowout, like a 12-0 game, and the weather's questionable, and it's hot, and they want to get out of there. He said, the short strike zone's going to be very, very big. Yeah, and that may make sense on occasion, but you hear that talk all the time in those situations.
Well, here's time for a confession. I've umpired some high school baseball, but more girls' fast-pitch softball games. And quite frankly, some of those girls' games could turn into some real, football scores. And A lot of times you had to get that strike zone a little bit wider, and in some cases a lot bit wider. Otherwise, you were going to have to call the game because of darkness, because these games usually started at 4 in the afternoon, and you had some of those games that were, the final score was 35-29, and it was danger of darkness. So yeah, I have very honestly expanded my strike zone. Now, I never did anything like call somebody out when they were safe by 4 steps or anything like that.
When you strike the whatever the strike zone is, even though, and that's the other thing, every umpire has their own strike zone, which drives me crazy. Oh, if your other league, they have a lower strike zone. This guy has a wider strike zone. This gives, depending on the day, kind of day he's having. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
But strike zone is an inexact science. Let's face it.
Right, and if he's doing it, it's the same for both teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And speaking, we talked about Earl Weaver earlier, and he actually made a pretty good quote about, which makes perfect sense. You know how an umpire comes in and pushes his player out of the way because he doesn't want his player. He made a quote one time: "The job of arguing with the umpire belongs to the manager because it won't hurt the team if he gets thrown out of the game." And I think. Just recently, before he retired a couple years ago, Bobby Cox just broke Earl Weaver's record for getting thrown out of games. Over like 100 and something games.
Well, I mean, let's face it. If you are in the bigs long enough as a manager, you're going to get thrown out of games. There isn't anything about it. And I think a lot of times a manager will leave the dugout and come out, and he might even say to the umpire when he gets there, "I know you got that right, but I got to make sure that my team knows that I'm backing them up." So he kicks a little dirt on the umpire's shoe and gets in his face. And
you've heard of many umpires says, "I'm getting thrown out because my team needs to wake up,"
mm-hmm.
and they purposely go out there to get thrown out. Yeah.
Well, and I refer to this a lot, and as I co-host with you over the however long we are doing this, you're going to hear me refer to it a lot because it's probably my favorite book. In Jim Bouton's book, Ball 4, he relates how on the last day of the season, Frank Larry went to the umpire before the ball game, and he said, and he wasn't pitching, and this was Frank Larry, the pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. He wasn't scheduled to pitch that day, and it was a day game. It was a Sunday afternoon game, and he went to the home plate umpire before the ball game and said, "Hey, I've got a 3:30 flight. See what you can do about getting me out of here." On the very first pitch of the ball game, I don't even remember whether it was a ball or a strike, but Larry hollered from the dugout, "What kind of call is that?" The home plate umpire turned to him and said, "You're out of here." And Frank Larry caught his plane. And so...
Yeah.
So I mean, it happens. It's they live together, they work together. And like I mentioned about Lou DeMuro trying to talk Mickey Stanley into playing one more year. I think that the ball players and the umpires really do have that respect for each other, which was plain about. The umpire that died, and that the ball players were, in solidarity with the umpires. We're gonna mourn this man too.
Yeah, because they can't play the game without him. I hope it gets better. We've mentioned Lou DeMuro a couple of times. He had a tragic death at the age of 51. He was after a game in Arlington, the Texas Rangers, in 1980. He was out to dinner with one of their coaches. 11 o'clock at night, he walked across the street, he got struck by a car and died. Died instantly. He's had too many head injuries. He was unrecoverable.
Yeah.
51 years old. Just, a night out for dinner after work, and you just never know.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of the better umpires. His son, Mike DeMuro, is followed in his footsteps as an umpire. We talked about Jerry Crawford earlier. On that crew with his father was a historic umpire, well-known umpire. I remember those names from when I was a kid. Another funny quote: Bob Uecker. We all know him as got right down in the front row. Still
right.
Broadcast for the Milwaukee Brewers. Was famous for the movies Major League. He was the broadcaster in those. Was a catcher, not a very good one, but he was still nonetheless a major leaguer at one time. He said, "Let's face it, umpiring is not an easy or happy way to make a living. In the abuse they suffer and the pay they get for it, you see an imbalance that can only be explained by their need to stay close to a game they can't resist.
Well, and this is the truth. This is the truth. People that are drawn to the game, that love the game, and they want to be part of it. And they say, I don't care how I'm a part of it. I just got to be there and be part of it. I think that's what drives people to go into things like officiating, whether it's football, baseball, basketball. You love the game so much, you want to be part of it in whatever way you can.
We talk about those bang bang plays. That's one of the first things I heard about umpiring when I was a kid, about learning the game of baseball. Umpire can just tell by hear the ball hit the glove and then look over. It's a sight sound thing. It's hard to miss, and I don't know how these wide calls can be missed. Remember the umpire Tom Gorman when we were kids?
Yep.
He made a quote. He says, anytime I got those bang bang plays at first, I called them out. It made the game shorter.
Well, it's funny because I did confess to you a little while ago that I did do some umpiring, and of course they don't just give you a chest protector and a mask and say go out and do it. You have to go into training, and part of the training that I did was the bang bang play, and they called me laser fast, and the guys that were training me were like, you have to stop and slow down. And I'm like, why? And because you always want to say to yourself, what is it, before you make that call? Even if you are absolutely convinced it's an out or absolutely convinced it's safe, you want to say to yourself, what is it? Then make the call. And I'll tell you the truth. I watch a lot of the baseball umpires, especially on those bang bang plays at first. And most of those guys are what the guys that trained me would call laser fast. Every once in a while, you'll see the guy who takes his time, even if on the bang bang, and say he's out or he's safe. But most of the time, they are laser fast. And, that was one thing that always stuck with me. What is it? What is it?
Yeah, there's been, like I said, quotes by umpires as well. There's one umpire, his name was Lee Belafont. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was a National League umpire. He said, I can truthfully say that I never liked umpiring. I stayed with it because I had to eat. So people, sometimes this is their way of survival. Harry Wendelstedt, I remember him years ago, National League umpire, said, if they did get a machine to replace us, you know what would happen to it? He says, why the players would bust it into pieces every time it ruled against them. They'd clobber it with a bat.
Well, and that's probably true. That's probably true. And, I don't want to, like I said before, I don't want to see the human element taken out of the game. I don't want to have that Fox fast track for their strike tracker or whatever call the balls and strikes. I think the human element has to be there. But again, what I want to see is I want to see some accountability. If a player or a manager is going to get fined for criticizing the umpire's call, then the umpire needs to be fined for making the bad call.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned how important it is the best ones are not supposed to be noticed. Like when you said you knew the officiators as like they were never there.
Right.
Of course, I'm sure you remember Bruce Fromming.
Mm-hmm.
That's a name that always stuck out.
Yep.
He said one of the really wrong theories about officiating is that a good official is one you never notice. He thought that was wrong. He said the umpire who made that statement was probably a real poor official who tried to get his paycheck and hide behind his partners and stay out of trouble all his life. Control of the ball game is the difference between umpires that show up for the players and the managers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Ed Runge was a name from the past umpires that was pretty much well respected. But according to Jim Bouton in Ball 4, the Yankees didn't like him because he was one of the few umpires who called Mickey Mantle on marginal pitches. He was actually not willing to give the Mick the doubt.
Yeah, you see that in basketball. They all how they treated Michael Jordan. I mean, which I always thought, why do they treat these players differently? It's not fair. And we talked about Ron Luciano, the author of Umpire Strikes Back. He has a quote that says, "Umpire's heaven is a place where he works third base every game. Home is where the heartache is."
Well, let's face it. If you're at third base and you've got two pitchers that are right around the plate, you may never see anybody over at your base. It's an interesting. When I was going through the training, the first thing that they said is, as an umpire, you are there to get outs. Don't become a spectator and think, oh, that was really boy, he hit that ball really good. You're there to get outs. When it's close, you got to analyze it and you got to make the right call. But just remember, you're there to get outs.
Do you remember that controversial play? I think it was the 1977 World Series, 78 World Series, where Reggie Jackson stuck his hip out. Clearly out of the baseline, the ball the ball would hit him, and Lasorda came out and just argued, and again, that something wasn't overturned, but it was clearly looked like a hometown call.
Sure, yeah, and the rule states the player has to make an effort to get out of the way.
He made an effort to get into it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's and you wonder, in that kind of a case, if the umpire said to himself, if I make this call, it's just gonna cause a firestorm, so I'm just gonna give him first base. And in that regard, I don't want umpires to not be there, and I don't want them to say, well, I don't want to insert myself into the game. I want them to make the right call.
We talk about the different bases. One thing I've always had trouble with, what do you think about the in the area play turning a double play?
Oh, that's ugly. I don't like
too
that.
many times.
Too many. You can see that the baseman or the shortstop is well off of the base while they receive the ball, but the runner gets called out anyway, and I think that goes with the philosophy of you're there to get outs. And in that regard, I want that play to be called correctly. I don't care whether you're there to get outs or not, because the game is going to end eventually.
Yeah, and it's just too many times. Or the exchange of the ball lately. I've seen a lot of bad calls lately. Well, he was throwing it to first base, but when he clearly dropped the ball, and he should have been safe at second too, not out, just because he was in the area.
Yeah. It's a tough life. I mean, there is no getting around it. Obviously, when I did high school games, you don't get players in your face or even coaches in your face.
And most of the time, you're the only umpire.
Well, yeah, and here in Arizona, I was fortunate that most of the time I had a partner, although I did end up doing some games by myself.
We usually behind the plate or behind the pitcher,
well,
right?
Yeah, when I had a regular partner, we just switch games. If I did the Tuesday game behind the plate, I'd do the Thursday game on the bases. But the interesting thing is that when you're out on the bases, you've got all of those bases to cover, And a lot of times you've got situations where you've got a play at first and a play at third, and you need help. And if you've got a partner who only wants to stay behind the plate and let you take care of everything else, that's a bad situation.
Yeah.
But I always look for that partner that was willing to come down that third baseline and make that call at third for me.
With all the teams in baseball, there are more close finishes now, and they say the games are more important in the postseason. But again, I always wonder why. All right, there's 6 umpires, 1 for each foul line in postseason World Series, but not for regular seasons games. And that's a lot of times you don't see these umpires running up the line to make sure the ball's fair or foul. So I don't know if that should change.
Well, even 6 umpires don't get it right sometimes, and I point out that 1996 ALCS Yanks versus the Orioles, Derek Jeter hits a ball that the 12-year-old kid reaches over, Jeffrey Meyer, reaches over the railing and makes the catch at least 8 to 10 inches down the wall, and he gets awarded a home run.
Yeah, what was that umpire doing on the right field line? Yeah.
I haven't a clue, but he didn't see it correctly.
Well, as we wrap up the show about umpires and we go on and on, I'm going to share a few kind of comical, humorous poems about umpires that people have written. This one by Anonymous in 1886. It says, "Mother, may I slug the umpire? May I slug him right away? So he cannot be here, mother? When the clubs begin to play, let me clasp his throat, dear mother, in a dear, delightful grip. With one hand and with the other, bat him several in the lip. Let me climb his frame, dear mother, while the happy people shout, I'll not kill him, dearest mother, I will only knock him out. Let me mop the ground up, mother, with his person, dearest do. If the ground can stand it, mother, I don't see why you can't too. Mother, may I slug the umpire, slug him right between the eyes? If you let me do it, mother, you shall have the champion prize."
You know, when you talk about poems, what about old Mighty Casey at the bat? He struck out, but we never found out whether he was called out or he struck out swinging.
Point. That's an excellent point. And one other thing, about 60 years ago, there's a short poem. "The umpire is a lonely man whose calls are known to every fan, yet none will call him Dick or Dan in all the season's games. They'll never call him Al or Ed, or Bill or Phil or Frank or Fred, or Jim or Tom or Tim or Ted. They'll simply call him names."
Yeah.
And that about wraps up this edition of Baseball Perspective. Thanks for listening, and tune in again. Check our Facebook page, Baseball A Pure Perspective, and coming soon, the website, baseballapureperspective.com.
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed, and the twilight lies gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket treadless, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, Satan's that star-spangled banner, yeah, wave o'er the land under the fray, and the home of the brave.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for tuning in to this weekend's series of shows for Vets on Media. We hope to see you all back here again starting on Wednesday with Vets on Radio with Adam and James. Until then, have a great and safe weekend, and we will see you then.